Tonight we are diving deep into the shadows of Scripture, looking for the faces you don't expect to see. Imagine you're standing on a dusty, sun-scorched plain in the ancient Near East. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and livestock. Around you, a small, nomadic tribe is setting up camp for the night. This is the world of the patriarchs, a world of fierce loyalty, brutal survival, and a deeply ingrained suspicion of outsiders. Everything and everyone not of your tribe is a potential threat. Now, be honest, thrust into that world with your modern sensibilities, your trust in institutions, your lack of calluses. You probably won't survive this. Not for a week. It's a world where the foreigner is, by default, the enemy. And yet, scattered throughout this grand, sprawling narrative are outsiders, foreigners, people from enemy nations who step out of the background and for a moment hijack the story, steering the destiny of God's chosen people in directions no one could have ever predicted. These aren't just cameos, they are critical turning points. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're all listening from tonight, so drop your city and the local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. The air in the valley of Shave is metallic and still. It's the kind of quiet that follows a storm, or in this case, a slaughter. Imagine the scene. Abram the Hebrew, a man whose name will one day be a global touchstone for faith, is not, at this moment, a gentle shepherd communing with God under the stars. He is a warlord, fresh from a stunning military victory. His face is likely caked in dust and sweat, his robes stained with the grime of a forced march and a brutal night raid. His 318 retainers, men born and trained in his own household, are a formidable private army. They are armed, exhausted, and on high alert, their eyes scanning the horizon, their hands never far from the hilts of their swords. They have just routed the combined forces of the four most powerful kings of the East, a Mesopotamian coalition led by the fearsome Chedorlaomer of Elam, a man whose imperial reach extended from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean coast. This was not a minor border dispute. This was an alliance of superpowers putting down a rebellion by 5 petty kings in the salt-encrusted plains of the Dead Sea, the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela. For 12 years, these cities had paid tribute to Chedorlaomer. In the 13th, they rebelled. In the 14th, the hammer fell. The eastern kings marched down the King's Highway, smashing every pocket of resistance in their path, culminating in a decisive battle in the valley of Siddim, a place now likely submerged under the southern end of the Dead Sea. They crushed the rebellion, plundered the cities, and took captives. Among those captives was Abram's nephew, Lot. This, for Abram, made the political personal. When a refugee brought him the news at his camp by the oaks of Mamre, Abram didn't hesitate. He wasn't a king, he wasn't a state, but he possessed the 2 things necessary for power in the ancient world: a loyal fighting force and a righteous cause. He pursued the victorious, plunder-laden armies of Chedorlaomer for over 150 miles north, a relentless, punishing chase. He caught them near Dan, at the very northern limit of the land, and in a brilliant tactical move, he divided his forces and attacked at night. The surprise was total. The Mesopotamian kings, so confident in their victory, were thrown into chaos. Abram drove them back, pursuing them even further, past Damascus to a place called Hobah. He recovered everything, all the goods, all the people, and most importantly, his nephew Lot. Now, on his return south, laden with the spoils of his own victory, he stops here in the King's Valley, a place just outside a small, fortified hill town called Salem. This is the debriefing, the moment of accounting. And out of the haze of victory, two figures emerge to meet him. The first is predictable. It is Barah, the king of Sodom, one of the men Abram has just saved. He is a politician, a pragmatist. He slinks out of the shadows of his defeat with a proposition. He is a man of the world, and his offer is worldly. Give me the people, and keep the goods for yourself. It's a standard post-battle negotiation over the spoils, but Abram refuses. He raises his hand to the sky and swears a solemn oath. He will not take so much as a thread or a sandal strap from Sodom, lest this petty, compromised king ever be able to say, I have made Abram rich. Abram's wealth, his victory, his very identity comes from a higher source. And he names that source. I have raised my hand to the Lord. And here he uses the covenant name, Yahweh, God Most High, El Elyon, creator of heaven and earth. He defines his God in universal terms. And in doing so, he draws a line in the sand between the sacred and the profane, between his own motivations and the grasping politics of a man like Barah. And then the second figure appears, and he is anything but predictable. He is an interruption, a mystery, a paradox. The text simply says, Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. It is an act of profound and jarring simplicity. Abram's men are warriors, caked in the blood and filth of battle. The king of Sodom has just tried to cut a deal for human chattel and material loot. And into this tableau of violence and negotiation walks a man with a loaf of bread and a skin of wine. He doesn't come to take or to bargain. He comes to give, to bless, to minister. His name is Melchizedek. His title is King of Salem. And his office, the one that rips a hole in the fabric of the narrative, is priest of God Most High, priest of El Elyon, the very same title Abram just used to identify his own God, Yahweh. In this moment, the story of a regional conflict and a family rescue suddenly becomes a story about the nature of God and the shape of worship for the entire world. This foreigner, this Canaanite king from a city that will one day be the heart of Israel, steps out of nowhere, and in 3 short verses, he changes everything. Let's dismantle this encounter, because every single word is freighted with a significance that will echo for the next 2,000 years. The text gives us his name, his city, his action, his office, and his words. First, his name, Melchizedek. In Hebrew, Malki-Tzedek. It's a compound name, as many royal names were in the ancient Semitic world. Melech means king. Tzedek means righteousness. His name literally means my king is righteousness, or simply, king of righteousness. This is not a common name like Abram or Lot. It reads more like a title, a throne name that is also a theological statement. It declares that the foundation of his rule, his very essence as a monarch, is rooted in the principle of righteousness. In a world of petty tyrants and brutal warlords like Chedorlaomer, a king who defines himself by justice is a radical anomaly. He is what every king in the ancient world was supposed to be in theory, but so rarely was in practice. The embodiment of divine order and equity on earth. Then his title, King of Salem, Melech Shalem. Again, the name is deeply significant. Shalem or shalom is the Hebrew word for peace, wholeness, completeness. So you have the King of Righteousness ruling over the city of peace. The conjunction is perfect. Righteousness and peace are two pillars of divine order in the Hebrew Bible. Psalm 85 will later say that righteousness and peace kiss each other. Here, in this mysterious pre-Israelite king, they are embodied. Where is Salem? The overwhelming scholarly and traditional consensus identifies it as the original name for Jerusalem. Psalm 76:2 makes the connection explicit. His tent is in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, also states this identification as a matter of fact. So, Melchizedek is the king of the Jebusite or Canaanite city-state that will, centuries later, become David's capital and the center of Yahwistic worship. This is a staggering detail. The first priest of the Most High God we meet in the Bible is a Canaanite king ruling in the very place that will become the holiest site in Judaism. He is not an Israelite. He is not from Abraham's family. He belongs to the very people that the Israelites will later be commanded to dispossess from the land. He is the ultimate outsider, and yet he stands at the very geographical and theological center of the story. This context is crucial. In the Middle Bronze Age, the time of the patriarchs, Canaan was a patchwork of small, fortified city-states, each ruled by its own king. These cities were often ethnically diverse and politically independent, though they might pay tribute to a larger foreign power, like Egypt or a Mesopotamian empire. Salem or Jerusalem was one such city, perched strategically in the Central Highlands. It was a strong, defensible position, which is why the Jebusites were able to hold it for so long, even after the Israelites entered the land under Joshua. Melchizedek was the ruler of this specific place, and his appearance here serves as a kind of primordial claim, suggesting that a pure worship of the true God existed in Jerusalem long before the arrival of the Israelites. It suggests that David's conquest of the city wasn't just a military victory. It was a reclaiming of a sacred space that had a holy history predating the covenant with Abraham itself. Now consider his action. He brought out bread and wine. On the most basic level, this is an act of hospitality. It's a meal of refreshment for a victorious, but weary warrior and his army. Bread and wine were staples of the ancient diet, but they were also more than that. They were elements of celebratory and covenantal meals. To share bread and wine was to establish a bond of fellowship and peace. Contrast this with the king of Sodom's offer. Birah offers the spoils of war, the dead things. Melchizedek offers the staples of life, the products of the cultivated earth. He brings sustenance, not plunder. His gesture is one of pure grace. But for later readers, this act became imbued with almost limitless typological meaning. For Christians, it is the most striking prefigurement of the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, where Jesus himself will take bread and wine and declare them to be his body and blood, the elements of a new covenant. It is impossible for a Christian reader to see bread and wine in this context and not feel the forward pull of the narrative toward that upper room in Jerusalem. The author of Genesis may not have intended this specific meaning, but the symbolic resonance is undeniable. Melchizedek, the priest king of Jerusalem, performs a liturgical act that anticipates the central rite of the new covenant that will also be inaugurated in Jerusalem. The parallels are too precise to be accidental in the grand sweep of the biblical canon. Next, and most importantly, his office. He was priest of God Most High. Cohen Ll Elyon. This is the bombshell. Not only is he a righteous king of a peaceful city, but he is also a priest. This combination of priest and king in one person was common in the ancient Near East. In Egypt, the pharaoh was considered a god and the chief priest of the entire nation. In Mesopotamia, kings often held high priestly offices, but within the later Israelite system, these two roles would be strictly separated. The king would come from the tribe of Judah, the priests from the tribe of Levi. A king who tried to usurp priestly functions, like Saul or Uzziah, was severely punished. But Melchizedek holds both offices seamlessly. He embodies a unified, holistic authority, both spiritual and temporal. But the real question is, who is the God he serves? El Elyon. As we noted, Abram himself uses this exact name in the very next passage, linking it to Yahweh. The name El was the generic term for God in many Semitic languages, but it was also the proper name of the supreme deity in the Canaanite pantheon. El was the father of the gods, the wise and ancient patriarch who presided over the divine council. He was seen as a benevolent, transcendent creator figure. Elyon, meaning Most High, was a common epithet applied to a supreme god, emphasizing his authority and exalted status. So, on a purely historical critical level, Melchizedek was very likely a priest of the Canaanite high god, El. The radical move the biblical writer makes is to have Abram immediately identify this Canaanite deity with his own covenant God, Yahweh. This is a moment of breathtaking theological convergence. The text isn't suggesting that Abram is adopting a Canaanite god. It's suggesting that this Canaanite priest king, this foreigner, had preserved a true and ancient knowledge of the one universal God, the creator of heaven and earth, under a different name. It implies that the stream of divine revelation was not confined solely to the channel of Abraham's lineage. God had his witnesses in unexpected places. Melchizedek's religion was not a pagan corruption, but a parallel, authentic tradition. Abraham recognizes this instantly. There is no suspicion, no theological debate. He sees in Melchizedek's worship a mirror of his own. This single moment serves as a powerful, albeit subtle, critique of any form of religious exclusivism that would later arise. It establishes a precedent for God working through people and nations outside the formal boundaries of the covenant community. The first priest mentioned in the Bible, the one who receives the patriarch's respect, is a Gentile. Then come his words, a two-part blessing. First, he blesses Abram. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. In the ancient world, the act of blessing was not just a statement of goodwill. It was an effective transfer of power and favor. And the rule was always that the superior blesses the inferior. A father blesses his son, a priest blesses the people. By accepting this blessing, Abram acknowledges Melchizedek's superior spiritual status in this moment. A Canaanite priest king is mediating divine favor to the father of the chosen people. This completely inverts the expected narrative. The blessing itself attributes Abram's recent military victory to El-Elyon, framing it not as a result of Abram's tactical genius, but as an act of divine providence. And again, the name of God is universalized, creator of heaven and earth. This is not a local tribal deity who lives on a mountain. This is the sovereign of the cosmos. Second, Melchizedek blesses God. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. This is a doxology, an expression of praise. He blesses the person, and then he blesses the person's God, who is also his God. He models for Abram the proper response to divine deliverance, gratitude and worship. He frames the entire event in a theological context, lifting it from the realm of human conflict into the realm of divine action. Abram's response to this is immediate and profound. The text concludes the episode with a simple, powerful clause. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. This is the first mention of tithing in the Bible. A tithe, a 10th part, was a common ancient practice of offering a portion of one's increase, be it agricultural produce or the spoils of war, to a deity or his priestly representative. By giving 1/10 of the plunder to Melchizedek, Abram is doing several things. He is acknowledging the legitimacy of Melchizedek's priesthood. He is honoring Melchizedek's God, El-Elyon, as the source of his victory, and he is submitting himself to the spiritual authority of this priest king. This act, like the blessing, affirms the hierarchy of the encounter. Abram, the great patriarch, pays homage to this mysterious foreigner. This predates the institution of the Levitical tithe in the law of Moses by some 400 years, establishing a more ancient precedent for the practice, one rooted not in law, but in a spontaneous act of grateful worship. And then, just as suddenly as he arrived, Melchizedek is gone. He disappears from the text. There is no mention of his birth, his death, his parentage, or his children. In the book of Genesis, a book utterly obsessed with genealogies and lineages, these are the generations of. This silence is deafening. It's a deliberate literary choice. Melchizedek is presented as a figure out of time, a man without beginning or end. He simply is. This profound narrative silence makes him an empty vessel, ready to be filled with meaning by later generations of interpreters. He is a blank slate onto which the highest ideals of priesthood and kingship can be projected. His very mystery becomes his most powerful characteristic. For over 1,000 years, Melchizedek vanishes from the pages of Scripture. He is a forgotten character, a strange blip in the story of Abraham. But then, in a royal psalm written for the coronation or celebration of a Davidic king in Jerusalem, he makes a stunning comeback. Psalm 110 is one of the most frequently quoted psalms in the New Testament. It begins with a famous oracle. The Lord says to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." It's a declaration of the king's divine appointment and coming victory. But then, in verse 4, comes an oath of shocking significance. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek. Let's unpack the audacity of this claim. The King of Israel, from the line of David, from the tribe of Judah, is being declared a priest. This was a direct violation of the established Mosaic order, where priesthood was the exclusive domain of the Levites, and the high priesthood the exclusive domain of the descendants of Aaron. For a non-Levite to be called a priest was radical. To be called a priest forever was revolutionary. And what is the basis for this new royal priesthood? It is not based on the law of Moses or the Aaronic lineage. It is based on a more ancient, more mysterious order, the order of Melchizedek. Why would the psalmist do this? The context is Jerusalem. David had recently conquered the Jebusite city of Jerusalem and made it his capital. In doing so, he was not just choosing a neutral political site, he was claiming the legacy of the city's ancient priest kings. By invoking Melchizedek, the Davidic monarch was legitimizing his own authority in Jerusalem. He was claiming to be the rightful successor to this primordial priest king. His kingship and his authority over the city's religious life were rooted in a tradition that predated and, in a sense, transcended the Levitical order. The Melchizedek priesthood was a royal priesthood. The Aaronic priesthood was not. This verse provided a theological foundation for the king's role as the patron and head of the national cult, establishing his authority even over the temple. It connected the current king directly back to the first and greatest priest king of Salem, bypassing the entire Levitical structure in the process. Melchizedek, the foreigner, becomes the model and the source of legitimacy for the kings of Israel. After this brief but potent appearance in the Psalms, Melchizedek again falls silent for centuries. Then, with the writing of the New Testament, he explodes back into the theological consciousness in the most developed and sustained argument about his identity ever written. the Epistle to the Hebrews. For the author of Hebrews, Melchizedek is not just an interesting historical figure or a political symbol. He is the central typological key to understanding the person and work of Jesus Christ. The entire argument of the letter, that Jesus is the ultimate high priest who offers the final, perfect sacrifice, rests on the foundation of the Melchizedekian priesthood. The author of Hebrews introduces the idea in chapter 5, stating that Christ, like Aaron, did not take the honor of high priest upon himself, but was called by God. And what was that calling? It was the declaration from Psalm 110, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." This immediately creates a problem that the author must solve. How can Jesus, from the tribe of Judah, be a priest? The law clearly states that priests must come from the tribe of Levi. The author's solution is brilliant. He argues that the Levitical priesthood was always intended to be temporary and imperfect. Its very inability to bring about true perfection and access to God necessitated the rise of a different, superior kind of priesthood, one that was foreshadowed long ago. This argument reaches its crescendo in chapter 7, which is a masterful verse-by-verse exposition of the Melchizedek story from Genesis 14. The author begins by reintroducing the character. This Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He immediately translates his name and title as King of Righteousness and King of Peace, highlighting their symbolic significance. Then he seizes on the most peculiar feature of the Genesis account, the silence. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. The literary silence of Genesis is transformed into a profound theological statement. The lack of a recorded genealogy, which would disqualify anyone from the Levitical priesthood, becomes the very qualification for this higher, eternal priesthood. Because Melchizedek has no recorded beginning or end, he serves as a perfect type or foreshadowing of the eternal Son of God, whose priesthood is likewise not based on earthly descent, but on his very nature. Having established this typological resemblance, the author then moves to prove Melchizedek's superiority over the entire Levitical system, using Abraham as his leverage. His first point is the tithe. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him 1/10 of the plunder. The logic is simple and powerful. Abraham is the great-grandfather of Levi. Abraham is the father of the entire Israelite nation. If Abraham paid a tithe to Melchizedek, he was acknowledging Melchizedek as his spiritual superior. If the patriarch himself submitted to this priest, then all of his descendants, including the Levitical priests, are implicitly subordinate to him as well. The author then pushes this logic one step further with a clever piece of rabbinic reasoning. He argues that Levi, the ancestor of all the priests, was symbolically present in the loins of his ancestor when Abraham met Melchizedek. Therefore, when Abraham paid the tithe, Levi, in a sense, paid the tithe too. The entire Levitical priesthood in embryonic form, paid homage to this foreign priest king. The second point is the blessing. As the author notes, without doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. Melchizedek blessed Abraham. Case closed. The priesthood of Melchizedek is demonstrably superior to the priesthood that would descend from Abraham. From this foundation, the author builds his climactic argument. If the Levitical priesthood had been able to achieve its purpose, to perfect the worshipper and provide true access to God, there would have been no need for another priest to arise, one in the order of Melchizedek. The very prophecy in Psalm 110 is proof that the Levitical system was flawed and incomplete. Its priesthood was based on heredity, a legal requirement concerning physical descent, and was ultimately powerless because it was held by mortal, sinful men who had to continually offer sacrifices for their own sins, as well as the sins of the people. The priesthood of Melchizedek, by contrast, is based not on lineage, but on the power of an indestructible life. This is the priesthood that Jesus inaugurates. He is from Judah, so he cannot be a priest according to the law. His qualification comes from the higher law, the divine oath of Psalm 110. He is the great high priest in the order of Melchizedek. His priesthood is not transient. It is eternal because he himself is eternal. He doesn't need to offer sacrifices for his own sin because he is sinless. And he doesn't need to offer endless animal sacrifices because he offered the single, perfect sacrifice of himself once for all time. The mysterious foreigner from the book of Genesis has become, in Christian theology, the archetype of the Son of God himself, the ultimate mediator between God and humanity. The bread and wine he brought to Abram in the valley have become the central symbols of the new covenant he establishes. This highly developed theological interpretation in the New Testament was not the only trajectory Melchizedek's story took. In the diverse world of Second Temple Judaism, his mystique captured the imagination of various other groups as well. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls found at Qumran, a fascinating text known as 11Q13, or the Melchizedek Scroll, was discovered. This text, a commentary on various biblical passages, reimagines Melchizedek not as a human king, but as a towering archangelic figure. He is a celestial being, an Elohim, a divine being or judge, who will appear at the end of days. In this apocalyptic scenario, Melchizedek is the one who will execute God's judgment upon Belial Satan and his evil spirits. He is a heavenly redeemer who will preside over the final day of atonement, proclaiming liberty to the captives and bringing forgiveness for the sins of the righteous. Here, the historical man from Genesis has been completely transformed into a cosmic, eschatological savior, a figure of divine power and authority who operates on the heavenly plane. Other Jewish writers took a different approach, one that sought to domesticate the mysterious foreigner. The problem for some rabbinic interpreters was that Melchizedek was a Gentile, a Canaanite, who was presented as superior to their father Abraham. This was an uncomfortable fact. A popular and ancient solution to this problem was to identify Melchizedek with Shem, the righteous son of Noah. Shem was still alive during the time of Abraham, according to the biblical genealogies. By making Melchizedek into Shem, the rabbis could bring this powerful priestly figure back into the fold. He was no longer a problematic Canaanite outsider, but a respected ancestor from within the covenantal line. This interpretation solved the genealogical problem and preserved the honor of the patriarch, explaining why Abraham would show him such deference. He wasn't just a priest king, he was Abraham's own revered ancestor. So we are left with this incredible figure, a man who appears for 3 verses in Genesis and then becomes a focal point for millennia of theological reflection. What is his ultimate legacy? Why does this foreigner matter so much? First, he represents the radical idea of a universal knowledge of God. He is proof, embedded in Israel's foundational text, that God did not leave himself without a witness among the nations. The pathway to the Most High was not, in the beginning, an exclusive road. Melchizedek's presence shatters any neat and tidy narrative of insiders and outsiders. He is the righteous Gentile, the unexpected servant of God, who demonstrates that the lines we draw between us and them are often invisible from a divine perspective. Second, he establishes the archetype of the ideal ruler, the priest king, the one who combines temporal authority with spiritual purity, who rules in righteousness and brings about peace. This dual office, separated in the Mosaic law, becomes a central hope in Israel's messianic expectation. The coming Messiah would be a king like David, but he would also be a priest like Melchizedek, a unifier of heaven and earth, power and piety. Third, his very mystery, his lack of genealogy, of beginning or end, is what makes him so enduringly powerful. His narrative emptiness allows him to become a symbol of the eternal and the transcendent. He is the perfect type, the perfect shadow, because he is not tied down by the limitations of a detailed biography. The author of Genesis, perhaps unknowingly, created the perfect literary hook upon which later theologians could hang their most profound ideas about an eternal priesthood and a divine son. Melchizedek is the ultimate surprising foreigner. He steps onto the stage from the wings, speaks a few lines of blessing, performs one simple liturgical act, and then exits, never to be seen again. But his appearance redirects the entire plot. He confronts Abram at the height of his worldly military power and reminds him of the true source of his strength. He blesses the patriarch, receives his tithe, and in doing so, establishes a spiritual order that transcends lineage and law. He is a Canaanite who is more righteous than the chosen, a foreigner who holds a priesthood superior to the one that would come to define Israel's worship. He is a quiet, dignified rebuke to any notion that God speaks only one language or works only through one people. He is the alien priest king of peace, a forgotten man from a forgotten time, who casts a very, very long shadow. from the ethereal quiet of the king's valley and the mysterious, timeless figure of a priest king, our story now plunges forward 4 centuries and down into the grit, dust, and desperation of a world on the brink of violent change. The solitary patriarch Abram, blessed by Melchizedek, has become the nation of Israel, a nation of millions, forged in the crucible of Egyptian slavery and tempered by 40 years of wandering in the unforgiving Sinai wilderness. They are a people defined by a promise, the promise of a land, and they are now standing on its very threshold. Imagine the scene from a high vantage point. You are looking down on the plains of Moab, east of the Jordan River. Below you, stretching for miles, is the vast, sprawling encampment of the Israelites. It is a city of tents, organized by tribe, a sea of humanity humming with a nervous energy that is part holy anticipation and part raw fear. The air smells of cooking fires, livestock, and the dry mineral scent of the desert. Their great lawgiver, Moses, is dead. He saw the land from a mountaintop, but was forbidden to enter. A new leader, Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' loyal lieutenant, is now in command. The weight of a nation's destiny is on his shoulders. He is untested in this supreme command, and before him lies the first, most formidable obstacle to fulfilling the 400-year-old promise. The Jordan River at flood stage, and just beyond it, the city of Jericho. Jericho is not just a city, it is a statement. It is the gateway to Canaan, the lock on the door of the promised land. Strategically, it commands the main north-south and east-west routes of the Jordan Valley. Militarily, it is a fortress. Symbolically, it is the embodiment of everything Israel is not. It is ancient, settled, and powerful. It represents the strength and supposed moral depravity of the Canaanite civilization that Israel has been commanded to displace. To fail at Jericho is to fail entirely. To conquer Jericho is to prove that God is with them. The psychological importance of this first contest cannot be overstated. Let's take a moment to understand what this fortress was really like. Modern archaeology at the site of Tel Es-Sultan reveals a city of immense antiquity, one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements on Earth. By the time of Joshua, in the late Bronze Age, Jericho had been a fortified city for thousands of years. Its defensive system was a marvel of ancient engineering and a nightmare for any attacker. It consisted of a massive stone retaining wall, perhaps 15 feet high, built at the base of the earthen mound, or tell, on which the city stood. Atop this retaining wall was a steep, plastered embankment, almost impossible to scale under fire. And at the top of that embankment, crowning the city, was the main wall itself, a formidable mud brick structure, likely 20 feet high or more. It was, for all intents and purposes, impregnable to a nomadic army with no siege engines. It was a city designed to wait out any threat, to mock any attacker from the security of its double-layered defenses. This is the challenge that confronts Joshua. A direct assault would be suicidal. He needs intelligence. He needs a way in. So Joshua does what any prudent commander would do. He summons 2 men for a covert reconnaissance mission. Go, look over the land, he commands them, especially Jericho. This is a deliberate echo of a similar mission 40 years prior, a mission that ended in catastrophic failure. Moses had sent 12 spies, 1 from each tribe, and 10 of them had returned with a report of terror. They spoke of giants in the land and fortified cities that reached to the sky, concluding, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Their fear infected the nation, leading to a rebellion against God and a sentence of 40 years of wandering until that entire generation had died in the desert. Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 spies who had dissented, who had urged faith over fear. Now, Joshua, as the new leader, is determined not to repeat that mistake. This will not be a mission by committee. It is a focused, 2-man infiltration. Their job is not to determine if they can take the city, but to assess the situation for the coming invasion. The spies slip away from the Israelite camp, make their way to the swollen Jordan, and somehow cross its rushing current. They approach the towering walls of Jericho, likely mingling with a caravan or a group of farmers returning from the fields, and enter the city. And here, the narrative takes its first strange and decisive turn. Where do 2 enemy spies go to gather intelligence in a hostile city? A tavern, the marketplace, the city gate where elders and merchants congregate. They do none of these things. Instead, the book of Joshua tells us, they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. This is a shocking choice, both morally and strategically. A house of prostitution was, in the ancient world, a place of ill repute, on the absolute fringe of respectable society. And yet, for a spy, it was a stroke of genius. An establishment like Rahab's was a liminal space, a place that was neither fully public nor fully private. It was a hub of transient life. Merchants, travelers, off-duty soldiers, and disgruntled citizens would pass through. It was a place where wine flowed, tongues were loosened, and information was currency. Strangers could come and go with a degree of anonymity that was impossible anywhere else. 2 foreign men seeking lodging for the night would be far less conspicuous here than at a respectable inn or a private home. And Rahab's house had another key feature, one that was common for such businesses. It was located on or built into the city wall itself. This provided discreet access for clients, and as it would turn out, a perfect escape route. The spies went to the one place in Jericho where they could be both invisible and hear everything. A place on the absolute margin of society, which also happened to be its most porous point. And here we meet our second foreigner, a woman who could not be more different from Melchizedek. He was a king and a priest, the pinnacle of his society. She is a prostitute at the very bottom of hers. Her name is Rahab, in Hebrew Rachav, from a root meaning wide or broad. Some have speculated that this might have been a nickname related to her profession, or perhaps it simply meant she was magnanimous or open-hearted. What we know for certain is her profession. She is a zana, the standard Hebrew word for a prostitute. We should be clear about what this meant. This was not the romanticized figure of modern fiction. A zana in the ancient Near East was a woman operating outside the protection of the patriarchal family structure. She was not a wife, a daughter, or a sister under the care of a male relative. She was economically independent, but this independence came at the cost of social ostracism and immense vulnerability. She was likely poor, living a precarious existence, selling the only thing she had, her body, to survive. She was marginalized, ritually unclean, and without honor in a society obsessed with honor and shame. She was, by every measure, a nobody, a disposable woman in a doomed city. And yet, it is to this woman that God's plan for the conquest of Canaan is entrusted. The story unfolds with the breathless pace of a spy thriller. The spy's arrival does not go unnoticed. A walled city is a closed system, a small town where everyone knows everyone else's business. The presence of two unfamiliar men, and Israelites at that, is quickly reported to the top. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." The king, a man whose name the Bible doesn't even bother to record, acts swiftly. He dispatches his soldiers, the ancient equivalent of a secret police squad, to Rahab's house. The order is simple and brutal. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. This is the fulcrum on which the entire story and Rahab's life now turns. The soldiers are at her door. Inside, she is hiding the enemies of her city and her people. She is caught between two terrifying powers. On one side is the king of Jericho, the absolute authority of her world, a man who holds the power of life and death over her. To defy him means certain execution as a traitor. On the other side are two desperate, armed foreigners, spies for an invading army that, according to the rumors sweeping through Canaan, is accompanied by a terrifying and wonder-working God. To betray them might mean dying with the rest of her city when that army eventually arrives. Her choice is not between good and evil, but between two different paths to almost certain death. And in this moment of supreme crisis, Rahab acts with a calmness, cunning, and decisiveness that is nothing short of astonishing. The text says she had already taken the two men and hidden them. She had anticipated this. She was steps ahead of the king. She goes to the door and faces the soldiers, and she lies with the fluency of a seasoned survivor. "Yes, the men came to me," she admits, disarming them with a partial truth, "but I did not know where they had come from." She constructs a plausible timeline. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. She then offers a piece of brilliant misdirection, urging the king's men to action. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. Her lie is specific, confident, and tactically sound. It sends the Jerichoan soldiers on a wild goose chase down the road to the Jordan fords, buying the spies precious time. The soldiers, convinced by her performance, rush out of the city just as the gates are being shut for the night. sealing themselves outside and the spies safely inside. The morality of Rahab's lie has been debated for centuries. She tells a direct falsehood to the legitimate authorities of her city. Yet, the biblical narrative presents this act without any condemnation. In fact, it is the hinge on which salvation turns. Like the Hebrew midwives in Exodus who lied to Pharaoh to save the male Israelite bobbies, Rahab's deception is portrayed as an act of righteousness because it serves a higher purpose, the preservation of life and the fulfillment of God's plan. She chooses a loyalty that transcends civic duty. Her lie is the first outward expression of her inward faith. Once the soldiers are gone, she goes up to the roof of her house. The scene is thick with atmosphere. The roof was a flat, functional space in ancient homes, used for sleeping in the hot season, for storage, and for work. The text gives us a wonderfully specific domestic detail. She had hidden the men under stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. Flax was harvested in the spring, around the time of Passover, which is precisely when these events are taking place. It was laid out on the flat roofs to dry in the sun before being processed into linen. This small detail grounds the high drama in the mundane reality of a woman's daily work. The spies are concealed not in a cellar or a secret passage, but within the ordinary fabric of her life. And it is here, on the roof, under the stars, surrounded by the scent of drying flax, that Rahab delivers one of the most remarkable confessions of faith in the entire Bible. She is no longer the cunning liar or the frightened woman. She is a theologian and a prophet. She looks at these two spies, these agents of her people's destruction, and she says to them, "I know." It is a statement of absolute, settled certainty. I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. She gives them a precise intelligence report on the psychological state of Canaan. The fortress of Jericho, so imposing on the outside, is rotting from the inside with terror. The Canaanites' courage has failed them. And then she explains the source of this terror, the basis for her own knowledge. "We have heard," she says. This is the key. Her faith is not a mystical vision or an abstract belief. It is a faith based on testimony, on the stories of God's power that have been passed from person to person, from nation to nation. "We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. This event happened 40 years ago on the other side of a vast wilderness, yet the story is still being told in the houses of Jericho. It has become legend." She also knows of more recent events, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. These were recent, local victories. The Israelites had just annihilated the powerful Amorite kingdoms that blocked their path. The news had crossed the Jordan, and the people of Jericho knew they were next. She summarizes the effect of these stories. "When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you." And then she makes the leap from history to theology, from what God has done to who God is. she utters a creedal statement that would be at home in the mouth of Moses or Joshua themselves. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. This is not a statement about one tribal god being stronger than another. This is an exclusive, universal, monotheistic confession. A Canaanite prostitute living in a polytheistic culture, surrounded by idols and temples to Baal and Asherah, declares that Yahweh, the God of the invading Hebrew slaves, is the one and only sovereign of the cosmos. It is a staggering moment. Her theological insight is clearer, and her faith more robust than that of the generation of Israelites who saw the miracles firsthand, and yet perished in the wilderness through unbelief. She has heard the stories, and unlike her countrymen who responded with only fear, she has responded with faith. But her faith is not passive. It is the faith of a survivor, a pragmatist. Having declared her belief and demonstrated her loyalty, she now leverages her position to negotiate the salvation of her family. She moves from confession to contract. Now then, she says, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. The word for kindness here is the great Hebrew covenant term hesed, a word that means loyal love, steadfast mercy, faithfulness. She is asking the spies to enter into a covenant of hesed with her. She, the outsider, is initiating a covenant with the representatives of the covenant people, based on her own act of hesed toward them. Give me a sure sign, she demands, that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Her request is not just for herself. It is for her entire clan, her Mispatcha. In this moment, the marginalized woman becomes the matriarch, the protector and savior of her kin. The spies who owe her their lives readily agree. They swear an oath to her in the name of their God. Our lives for your lives, they declare. They have moved from being enemies to being covenant partners. But there is a condition. They need a way to identify her house when the invasion comes, when the city is engulfed in the chaos and violence of battle. They need a sign. This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us, they explain, unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. The scarlet cord. This is the sure sign she asked for. Like the flax on the roof, it is an object from her world. Scarlet or crimson dye was expensive, perhaps part of her trade, a way to make herself visible and attractive. But now it becomes a symbol of something far greater. It is a cord of tikva in Hebrew, and the word tikva has a powerful double meaning. It means both cord and hope. The cord she is to tie in her window is literally her hope for salvation. The color itself, scarlet, is deeply symbolic. It is the color of blood. For any reader steeped in the story of the Exodus, the image is immediate and overwhelming. It is a direct echo of the Passover, when the Israelites were commanded to paint the blood of a lamb on their doorposts, so that the angel of death would pass over their houses and spare their firstborn. Here again, a sign of blood on a dwelling, in this case a scarlet cord in a window, will mark a household for salvation amidst widespread destruction. It is a public act of faith. Tying that cord in her window would be an act of open treason, a declaration of her allegiance to the invaders for all to see. It is a sign of her separation from the fate of her city and her identification with the people of God. The deal is struck. The oath is sworn. Now she must get them out of the city. Her house, built into the wall, provides the means. She takes a rope, not the scarlet cord, but a common rope, and lets them down through her window to the ground outside the city defenses. Her transformation is now complete. She has gone from being a hostess to a liar, to a theologian, to a negotiator, to a savior, and now, finally, to a military strategist. She gives the spies crucial advice for their escape. Go to the hills, so the pursuers will not find you. Hide there for 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. She knows the local terrain. She knows the tactics of her king's search parties. She ensures their mission is a success. Spies escape into the night, following her instructions to the letter. After 3 days of hiding in the hills west of Jericho, they make their way back to the Jordan, cross the river, and report to Joshua. And what is their report? They don't talk of high walls or mighty warriors. Their report is a direct quote from the woman on the roof. They echo the intelligence that the foreign prostitute gave them. The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. Rahab's confession of faith has become the foundation of Israel's courage. Her words have tipped the psychological balance of the entire conflict. The invasion can now begin. The story then jumps to the famous account of Jericho's fall in Joshua chapter 6. The Israelite army crosses the Jordan on dry ground, a miracle that echoes the Red Sea crossing and confirms that the same God is with them. They lay siege to Jericho, but it is a siege unlike any other. There are no battering rams, no siege towers. There is only a bizarre, week-long ritual. For 6 days, the army of Israel, led by priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, marches in silence around the city once a day. On the 7th day, they march around the city 7 times. And at Joshua's command, the priests blow their trumpets. The entire nation lets out a mighty shout, and the walls of the city collapse. The text says they fell flat. The scene is one of terrifying, divinely ordained chaos. The Israelites charge into the defenseless city with the command to enact Hirm, a ritual of complete destruction dedicated to God. Every man and woman, young and old, every ox, sheep, and donkey is to be put to the sword. The city and everything in it is to be burned. It is a scene of brutal, absolute judgment. But in the midst of this all-consuming destruction, there is one singular exception. Before the final charge, Joshua gives a specific command, calling back to the oath sworn on that rooftop. But Joshua had said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." The 2 spies themselves are dispatched on a rescue mission. They are the only ones who know her, the only ones bound by the covenant of Hesed. They navigate the chaos of the collapsing, burning city, find the house on the wall marked by the scarlet cord a beacon of hope in a maelstrom of destruction, and they fulfill their promise. They bring out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all her relatives. They escort her entire clan to safety. The text tells us they brought them to a place outside the camp of Israel. This was likely a temporary measure related to ritual purity laws. As Gentiles who had just emerged from a doomed city, they would need to undergo a period of transition before being fully integrated. But the final sentence of the narrative makes her ultimate fate clear, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. Her assimilation is complete. The prostitute of Jericho has become a citizen of Israel. The outsider is now an insider, and this is where Rahab's story could have ended. It would have been a remarkable tale of one woman's courage and faith, a moving anecdote of salvation. But her legacy, her influence on the course of biblical history, was only just beginning. She doesn't just join the people of Israel, she is woven into its very genetic and spiritual fabric, becoming a foundational matriarch. Her most astounding reappearance comes centuries later, in the very first chapter of the New Testament. In the Gospel of Matthew, the author begins by tracing the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, back through the royal line of David to the patriarch Abraham. Genealogies in the ancient world were almost exclusively male-dominated affairs, lists of fathers begetting sons. But Matthew deliberately includes 5 women in his list, and each one is included for a reason. Each one carries a story that highlights a particular aspect of God's strange and scandalous grace. And there, in Matthew 1:5, we read the astonishing line, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Let this sink in. Rahab, the Canaanite, the prostitute, the traitor to her own people, marries an Israelite man named Salmon, likely one of the spies she saved. She gives birth to a son, Boaz, who will become the noble kinsman redeemer in the book of Ruth. This makes Rahab the great-great-grandmother of King David, Israel's most revered monarch. And by extension, it places her directly in the ancestral line of Jesus himself. This is not just inclusion, it is exaltation. Matthew is making a radical theological point from the very beginning of his gospel. The story of salvation is not a story of pure bloodlines or moral perfection. It is a story of God weaving his purposes through the lives of broken, unexpected, and even scandalous people. The fact that a Gentile prostitute is one of the great matriarchs of the Messianic line is a declaration that the grace of God is for everyone. It shatters boundaries of race, class, and past sin. The foreigner from the wall of Jericho now sits in the royal family tree. Her legacy is cemented in 2 other key New Testament passages. The author of the Epistle to the Hebrews, in his great Hall of Faith in chapter 11, lists the heroes of the Old Testament who lived by faith. After speaking of the patriarchs and Moses, he writes, By faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. For this author, Rahab's defining characteristic is not her profession, her ethnicity, or her lie. It is her faith. She is placed alongside the greatest figures in Israel's history as a paragon of belief in God's promises. Her action of welcoming the spies is presented as the direct evidence of her faith. The author of the Epistle of James makes a similar, but subtly different, point in his discussion of the relationship between faith and works, arguing against a faith that is merely an intellectual assent. James uses two prime examples of a living, active faith: Abraham, the father of the nation, and Rahab, the foreign prostitute. It's an incredible pairing. He writes, "Was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead." For James, Rahab is the perfect illustration of a faith that works. Her belief in the God of Israel was not a private opinion. It was a conviction that propelled her into risky, life-altering, world-changing action. She didn't just believe God would give Israel the land. She acted on that belief, aligning herself with God's purposes at the risk of her own life. Rahab's story provides a powerful counter-narrative to another story that unfolds in the very next chapter of Joshua. In Joshua 7, after the glorious victory at Jericho, Israel suffers a humiliating defeat at the small town of Ai. Joshua discovers there is sin in the camp. A man named Achan, an Israelite from the prestigious tribe of Judah, had violated the command of Hiram. He had secretly stolen a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold from the spoils of Jericho. He was an insider, a full-blooded member of the covenant community, who let his greed override his faithfulness. His sin brought judgment upon the entire nation, and he and his entire family were stoned and burned. The contrast could not be more stark. Rahab, the foreign prostitute, the outsider, demonstrated radical faith and obedience, and was saved, along with her entire family. Achan, the Israelite man, the insider, demonstrated faithlessness and disobedience, and was destroyed, along with his entire family. The message is clear. Membership in the people of God is determined not by bloodline, ethnicity, or social standing, but by a living, active, obedient faith. In the end, the woman on the wall becomes a paradigm of salvation. She begins as a symbol of everything that is other, a Canaanite, a woman in a man's world, a prostitute in a society that valued purity. She lived on the physical and social margins of a city that was under God's judgment. And yet, she heard the story of God's power, she believed it, and she acted on it. She traded her allegiance to a doomed king for allegiance to the King of the cosmos. She negotiated her family's salvation with a scarlet cord of hope, a bloody thread that pulled her from death into life. She is the first convert in the promised land, a testament to the fact that God's call is to anyone who will listen. His grace is for anyone who will believe, and his family is open to anyone who will act. She is the surprising foreigner who, by an act of faith-fueled treason, secured the first great victory for Israel in Canaan, and embedded herself forever into the heart of salvation history. We pull away from the thunderous, chaotic collapse of Jericho's walls, from the epic, nation-defining violence of the conquest, and we let the dust of that campaign settle. Centuries pass. The story of Israel moves from its heroic age of unity under Joshua into a long, dark, and bloody period of disintegration. This is the time of the judges. The refrain of the book that chronicles this era serves as its grim epitaph. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. It is an age of anarchy and apostasy, a downward spiral of sin, foreign oppression, desperate cries for help, and temporary deliverance by a series of flawed, charismatic warlords called judges. It is a time of civil war, of tribal jealousies, of idols being worshipped in the hills, of a nation forgetting its God and its calling. The grand, unified narrative of the conquest has fractured into 100 desperate, localized stories of survival. It is against this bleak, chaotic backdrop of social and spiritual decay that our next story unfolds. And it is a story that, on its surface, could not be smaller or more intimate. It is not about armies and kings, but about 3 widows and a field of barley. It is a quiet story, yet its impact on the trajectory of biblical history will be as profound as the fall of any city. Our story begins not with a bang, but with the gnawing emptiness of a famine. And ironically, the famine is in the town of Bethlehem, a name that in Hebrew, Beit Lechem, means house of bread. The house of bread has no bread. This crisis forces a man named Elimelech to make a desperate choice. He decides to leave his ancestral land, his inheritance in the promised land of Judah, and become an economic refugee. With him are his wife, Naomi, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Their destination is a neighboring country, a place just across the Dead Sea to the east, the high plateau of Moab. This decision is freighted with negative connotations. To an Israelite reader, Moab was not just another country. It was a place of deep-seated animosity and suspicion. The Moabites, according to the Genesis narrative, were the product of an incestuous union between Lot and his older daughter, a story that forever tainted them in Israelite eyes. They were seen as perennial enemies. It was Balak, king of Moab, who hired the prophet Balaam to curse the Israelites as they camped on his border. It was Eglon, a later king of Moab, who oppressed Israel for 18 years until he was assassinated by the judge Ehud. Religiously, they were pagans, their chief national deity being a god named Chemosh, a fearsome deity who, according to the Mesha stele, an ancient Moabite inscription, demanded the devotion of Hirm, the same ritual destruction Israel enacted at Jericho, and who was associated by some with the horrific practice of child sacrifice. Most pointedly, the law of Deuteronomy contained a specific and severe exclusion clause. No Ammonite or Moabite, or any of their descendants, may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. By moving his family to Moab, Elimelech is not just seeking food, he is stepping outside the covenant land and into a forbidden, ritually unclean, and hostile territory. At first, the move seems to be a success. They escape the famine. But the price of this physical survival is a slow spiritual and familial erosion. The two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, whose names ominously mean sickness and wasting away, take Moabite women as their wives. One is named Orpah, the other Ruth. While the law did not explicitly forbid marrying Moabite women, it was a profound compromise, a step towards assimilation into a foreign and pagan culture. And then the temporary reprieve ends, and tragedy strikes, not once, but 3 times over. First, Elimelech dies, leaving Naomi a widow in a foreign land. Then, after about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion die as well. The family line of Elimelech is extinguished. Naomi is left utterly bereft, a widow without sons, without heirs, and without a provider, stranded in Moab with only her 2 foreign daughters-in-law. She is the very picture of emptiness. Word eventually reaches her that the famine in Judah has broken. The Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them. And so Naomi decides to return home. But the woman who prepares for this journey is not the same one who left. She is broken, hollowed out by grief. She begins the journey back with Orpah and Ruth, but at the border of Moab, at a literal and metaphorical crossroads, she stops and tries to send them back. Her speech to them is a masterpiece of despair. Go back, she tells them, each of you to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown to your dead husbands and to me. She blesses them in the name of Yahweh, but it is a blessing of farewell. She sees no future for them with her. Will I have more sons who could become your husbands? She asks, a bitter reference to the custom of levirate marriage. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I had a son tonight, would you wait for him to grow up? Her logic is brutal and unassailable. She is a dead end. It is more bitter for me than for you, she concludes, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Here is her theology. God is her enemy. The Almighty El Shaddai has personally afflicted her. Faced with this bleak reality, Orpah makes the sensible choice. She weeps, she kisses her mother-in-law, and she turns back to her people, her family, and her gods. The text does not condemn her. She does what anyone would advise her to do. But Ruth, our third surprising foreigner, refuses. She clings to Naomi. When Naomi tries again to send her away, look, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. Ruth responds with a speech that is arguably the most magnificent pledge of loyalty in all of literature. It is a vow, a covenant that systematically reverses every separation Naomi has tried to create. Let us listen to it closely, for it is the foundation upon which the rest of biblical history will be built. Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. She begins with an unconditional refusal to be separated. Then she binds her life to Naomi in every conceivable dimension. Where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. This is a pledge of shared destiny, a nomadic vow that ties her physical existence to Naomi's, no matter how uncertain or impoverished. Then comes the radical leap of identity. Your people will be my people. She, a Moabite, renounces her national identity. She chooses to cast her lot with Israel, to become a member of a people who, by law, are supposed to reject her. She is an immigrant by choice, an Israelite by sheer force of will. And then, the ultimate commitment, and your God will be my God. She renounces Chemosh and the gods of Moab and pledges her allegiance to Yahweh, the God Naomi has just accused of afflicting her. Ruth's faith is so profound that she chooses Naomi's God even when Naomi herself is in a crisis of faith. Her conversion is total. Finally, she seals this covenant with an oath that transcends life itself. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. She will not even return to her ancestral land for burial. She chooses to become part of the soil of Israel. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. She invokes the name of Yahweh to call a curse upon herself if she fails to keep this vow. It is an act of stunning, selfless, and radical love. In the Hebrew, this kind of love is called hesed, a word that defies easy translation, but encompasses loyalty, steadfastness, mercy, and covenant faithfulness. Ruth, the Moabite, has just demonstrated a more perfect hesed than anyone in the chaotic world of the judges. And so the two women, a bitter Israelite and her fiercely loyal Moabite companion, travel on to Bethlehem. Their arrival causes a stir. Can this be Naomi? The women of the town ask. The name Naomi means pleasant, and the woman before them is anything, but don't call me Naomi, she retorts. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. She is defined by her emptiness, her loss. And in her declaration, she seems to completely overlook the woman standing beside her. She says she is empty, yet she has Ruth, a treasure of loyalty she cannot yet see. They arrive, the text carefully notes, at the beginning of the barley harvest. In this small, seemingly incidental detail, a seed of hope is planted. Famine has given way to harvest. Emptiness may yet give way to fullness. Their situation is dire. They are two widows with no male provider and no source of income. Ruth, once again, is the one who takes the initiative. Please let me go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain, she asks Naomi. Here, she is relying on a provision in the law of Moses, a form of ancient social welfare. Leviticus 19 commands farmers, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner living among you. Ruth is all of these things, poor, a widow, and a foreigner. She has a legal right to gather the scraps. It is a meager, back-breaking existence, but it is a right. So Ruth goes out, and the narrator, with a masterful literary wink, tells us that, as it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. The Hebrew phrase suggests chance, a happy accident. But in the theology of this book, there are no accidents. Ruth has been guided by the invisible hand of divine providence to the exact right place at the exact right time. She has been led to the field of the one man who can save her. And here we meet Boaz. He is introduced as a gibber hail, a Hebrew phrase that can mean a mighty warrior, but here means a man of great wealth, standing, and, as we will see, noble character. His first words in the story reveal his piety. He arrives at the field and greets his workers with a blessing. "The Lord be with you." And they reply, "The Lord bless you." This is a man whose daily life is saturated with a consciousness of God's presence, a stark contrast to the godless chaos of the era. He immediately notices the unfamiliar woman working in his field and asks his foreman, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The foreman's reply identifies her by her disability and her virtue. "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean.' She has been working steadily from morning till now." Boaz approaches Ruth, and instead of treating her as a marginal, anonymous foreigner, he shows her extraordinary and unexpected heed. He elevates her from a mere gleaner to a protected guest. He tells her not to go to any other field. "Stay here with my women," he says, offering her the safety of community and protection from the potential harassment of the male workers. He commands his men not to bother her, and then he goes a step further, offering her a drink from the water his own servants have drawn, a generous and life-sustaining gift in the heat of the day. Ruth is overwhelmed. She bows down with her face to the ground. "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Her question is at the heart of the story. Why would this powerful Israelite man show such kindness to an outsider, a Moabite? Boaz's answer shows that her reputation for heed has preceded her. "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before." He knows her story. He understands the depth of her sacrifice. And then he pronounces a blessing upon her that becomes the theological centerpiece of the narrative. "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." He sees her not as a Moabite outcast, but as a faithful convert, a spiritual refugee who has sought protection under the wings of Israel's God. The image of divine wings is a rich one in the Old Testament, suggesting the care and protection of a mother bird. Boaz recognizes her faith and declares that she will find her reward in the very God she has chosen. He then invites her to eat with him and his workers, sharing his bread and wine vinegar, and he secretly instructs his men to pull out extra stalks of grain from the bundles and leave them for her to find. His grace is both protective and productive. By the end of the day, Ruth has gathered an entire ephah of barley, about 3/5 of a bushel, enough food for 2 women for at least a week. When she returns home, Naomi is astonished. She recognizes that such abundance could only be the result of extraordinary kindness. "Where did you glean today?" she asks. "Blessed be the man who took notice of you." When Ruth tells her the man's name was Boaz, a light goes on for Naomi. For the first time, her bitterness begins to crack, replaced by a glimmer of hope. "The Lord bless him," she exclaims. "He has not stopped showing his kindness, heed to the living and the dead." She then reveals the crucial piece of information. "That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers. And with that phrase, Gaul, kinsman redeemer, the story moves into its second act. This was a vital legal and social concept in ancient Israel, designed to protect family identity, land, and lineage. The Gaul was the closest male relative who had the right and the responsibility to redeem or buy back family members or property that had been lost due to poverty. If a man had to sell his ancestral land, the Gaul was supposed to buy it to keep it in the family. If a man sold himself into slavery, the Gaul was to buy his freedom. Closely related to this was the law of levirate marriage from Deuteronomy 25, which stipulated that if a man died without a son, his brother was obligated to marry the widow, and their firstborn son would be considered the heir of the deceased brother, thus ensuring that his name and lineage would not die out. Naomi, the pragmatist, now sees a path forward. She sees in Boaz not just a kind man, but a potential solution to their family's extinction. She devises a plan that is audacious, risky, and steeped in the symbolism of the ancient world. She tells Ruth to wait until the end of the harvest, a time of celebration and feasting. Then she instructs her to wash, put on perfume, and wear her best clothes. She is to go to the thrashing floor, a large, open-air space where the grain was processed. She must wait until Boaz has finished eating and drinking and has lain down to sleep on a pile of grain. Then, in the dead of night, she is to approach him quietly, uncover his feet, and lie down there. This is a scene fraught with ambiguity and danger. Ruth is a vulnerable foreign widow. Boaz is a powerful man. She is approaching him at night, alone, in an isolated place. The act of uncovering his feet is open to multiple interpretations. Some have seen it as a euphemism for a sexual advance. But given the high moral tone of the book and the characters of both Ruth and Boaz, this is unlikely. A more probable interpretation is that it was a customary, symbolic gesture. In the ancient world, to be at someone's feet was to be in a position of submission and service. For a woman to place herself at a man's feet in this context was a silent but powerful appeal, a proposal. She is, in essence, placing herself under his authority and asking for his protection. Ruth, with her characteristic loyalty, says, "I will do everything you say." She goes to the thrashing floor. She waits. When Boaz is asleep, she creeps in, uncovers the place where his feet are under the blanket, and lies down. In the middle of the night, Boaz is startled awake and finds a woman at his feet. "Who are you?" he asks into the darkness. And Ruth's reply is a masterstroke of theological and romantic genius. "I am your servant Ruth," she says. And then she makes her move. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." This is an incredibly rich and layered statement. The Hebrew word for corner of your garment is kanaf. It can also be translated as wing. It is the very same word Boaz had used in his blessing to her at their first meeting, when he prayed that she would be rewarded by the God of Israel, under whose wings, kanaf, you have come to take refuge. Ruth is now, in essence, calling back his own blessing to him. She is saying, You prayed that I would find refuge under God's wings. Now you be the agent of that blessing. You be the wings of God for me. Cover me, protect me, marry me, for you are the gall. It is a bold, beautiful, and irresistible appeal. Boaz is deeply moved. He doesn't react with anger or suspicion. He reacts with praise. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he says, using a term of fatherly affection. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. What does he mean? Her first act of heed was remaining loyal to Naomi. But this second act, he says, is even greater. Why? You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. Ruth could have sought a more personally advantageous match. Instead, she has chosen to pursue her duty to her dead husband's family line by appealing to the older Boaz, the kinsman redeemer. Her loyalty is to the family, to preserving the name of the dead. It is a selfless act of heed. Boaz immediately agrees to her proposal. I will do for you all you ask, but his integrity demands that he reveal one complication. There is another man, a kinsman who is a closer relative than he is, who has the first right of redemption. Boaz is a man who does things properly, publicly, and legally. He promises Ruth that he will go to the city gate in the morning and settle the matter. If the other man is willing to redeem her, Boaz will step aside. If not, Boaz swears an oath. As surely as the Lord lives, I will do it for you. He then has her stay at his feet until morning for safety, and sends her home before dawn with a generous gift of 6 measures of barley, a sign to Naomi that her mission was a success and that he will provide for them. The final act of our drama takes place at the city gate, the public square and courthouse of the ancient world. Boaz is a man of his word. He goes to the gate, finds the other kinsman redeemer, a man so unimportant to the story he is never even named, simply called so-and-so. And he convenes a meeting with 10 of the town elders as official witnesses. The negotiation that follows is a masterclass in legal maneuvering and a profound test of character. Boaz first frames the issue purely as a real estate transaction. Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech, he says. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. The other kinsman, seeing a good business opportunity to expand his own property, readily agrees. I will redeem it, he says. And now Boaz reveals the fine print, the human complication attached to the property. On the day you buy the land from Naomi, Boaz clarifies, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. The deal is not just for the land, it's for the woman. It comes with an obligation to marry a poor, foreign widow and to raise up a son who will not be legally considered his own, but will be the heir of the deceased Mahlon. This heir would then inherit the very land the kinsman had just purchased. Suddenly, the deal doesn't look so good. The unnamed kinsman immediately retracts his offer. Then I cannot redeem it, he says, because I might endanger my own estate. His motivation is purely selfish. He is willing to acquire property, but he is unwilling to take on a personal responsibility that might diminish the inheritance of his own existing children. He is a man of law, but not a man of heed. He cannot see beyond the bottom line. And so, in a public legal ceremony, he takes off his sandal and gives it to Boaz, a customary act signifying the transfer of rights and property. The unnamed man fades into history, a footnote defined by his failure to love, and Boaz steps into the void. He turns to the elders and all the people at the gate and makes a public declaration. He announces that he has bought all the property of Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion, and more importantly, I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. His motivation is the polar opposite of the other man. It is entirely about heed, about preserving the family, about honoring the dead. The community erupts in blessing. The elders and the people pronounce a prayer over them that is both beautiful and prophetically significant. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. They compare the foreign widow to the great founding matriarchs of the nation. Then they add another, even more pointed blessing. And may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. This is a stunning reference. The story of Tamar and Judah in Genesis 38 is a scandalous tale of a woman who posed as a prostitute to trick her father-in-law into fulfilling his levirate duty. It was an irregular, even shocking union. Yet it was from this union that the tribe of Judah, the royal tribe, descended. By invoking this story, the people of Bethlehem are acknowledging that God has a history of working through strange and unconventional unions to achieve his purposes. The story rushes to its conclusion. Boaz marries Ruth. The narrator adds a simple, profound statement. And the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. After so much death and barrenness, there is new life. The child is not just a private joy, he is a cause for public celebration. The women of the town flock to Naomi, whose journey is now complete. Her emptiness is filled. Praise be to the Lord, they say, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. In the ultimate reversal, Ruth the Moabite, the foreigner, is declared more valuable than the perfect number of Israelite sons. Naomi takes the child named Abd, which means one who serves, and becomes his nurse. Her bitterness is washed away in the joy of this new life. And then, in the final verses, the camera pulls back from this intimate domestic scene to reveal the vast historical canvas on which it has been painted. The book ends with a simple 10-name genealogy that lands like a thunderclap, revealing the true significance of this quiet story. Salmon, the father of Boaz, Boaz, the father of Abd, Abd, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David. This is the climax. This is the point of it all. Ruth the Moabite, the refugee from an enemy nation, the woman legally excluded from the assembly of the Lord, has become the great-grandmother of David, the greatest king in Israel's history. This gentle, pastoral idol, set in the darkest days of the Judges, is nothing less than the origin story of the Messianic line. Without the radical heed of this one foreign woman, without her refusal to abandon her mother-in-law, without her courage at the thrashing floor, the royal house of David would not exist. The course of biblical history has been fundamentally and irrevocably altered by her loyalty. Ruth's legacy is a powerful testament against the forces of exclusion and nationalism. In a time of chaos and apostasy, it is the foreigner, the Moabite, who models perfect faithfulness to Yahweh and to his people. Her story insists that the boundaries of the covenant community are defined not by blood or ethnicity, but by heed, by a faith that works itself out in loyal love. She is the outsider who not only finds refuge under the wings of Israel's God, but who, in turn, becomes a founding matriarch who builds the very house of Israel itself. She sought only to glean the scraps from the edges of a field, and in the end, she inherited the future. We leave the dusty barley fields of Bethlehem, the quiet, domestic world of Ruth and her kinsman redeemer, and we are flung forward across 500 years of tumultuous history. The small, intimate story of a family's survival has blossomed into the epic of a nation's life and death. The child born to Ruth and Boaz, Abd, became the father of Jesse, who became the father of David. The Davidic monarchy, born from the loyalty of a Moabite woman, rose to a golden age under Solomon, building a magnificent temple to Yahweh in Jerusalem. But the story did not stay golden. The kingdom fractured in a bitter civil war, splitting into two rival nations, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Centuries of political intrigue, warfare, and spiritual compromise followed. Prophets rose to warn of impending judgment, but the warnings were largely ignored. Finally, the end came, brutally and completely. First, the northern kingdom of Israel was annihilated by the Assyrian Empire, its people deported and scattered into oblivion. Then, in the early 6th century BCE, the southern kingdom of Judah, the last remnant of the covenant people, met its own terrible fate at the hands of a new global superpower, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar did what was previously thought to be theologically impossible. He conquered Jerusalem, systematically tore down its walls, and burned the Temple of Solomon, the sacred dwelling place of God on earth, to the ground. The Davidic monarchy was extinguished, the king blinded and dragged to Babylon in chains. The intellectual, spiritual, and economic elite of the nation were rounded up and force-marched hundreds of miles into exile to live as a captive people in the heart of their enemy's empire. This was the Babylonian exile, and it was the absolute nadir of Israel's history. It was more than a military and political catastrophe. It was a theological apocalypse. Every pillar of their faith had been demolished. the promised land was lost. The eternal covenant with David was broken. The temple of God was a smoldering ruin. The question that hung in the humid air by the rivers of Babylon was a stark and terrifying one. Had their God, Yahweh, been defeated? Was Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, stronger? Or worse, had Yahweh abandoned them forever? For 70 years, this question festered, and the hope of restoration dwindled to a faint and desperate memory. It would take a miracle to reverse this fate, a deliverance on the scale of the Exodus itself. And that deliverance would come not from a new Hebrew prophet or a Jewish warrior king, but from a direction so unexpected it would permanently revolutionize Israel's understanding of God and the world. It would come from a pagan, a foreigner, a conqueror from the East. To understand the sheer improbability of this, we must first picture the world of the mid-6th century BCE. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was the undisputed master of the ancient Near East. The city of Babylon itself was the wonder of the age, the largest and most magnificent metropolis on earth. Its outer walls were so thick that a chariot could do a U-turn on top of them. Its entrance was the breathtaking Ishtar Gate, a massive structure covered in brilliant blue-glazed bricks and decorated with reliefs of dragons and bulls. At its heart rose a colossal ziggurat, a temple tower reaching for the heavens, which may have been the inspiration for the Tower of Babel story. Babylon was the center of global power, wealth, science, and culture. It was also, in the eyes of the Jewish exiles, the ultimate symbol of arrogant, idolatrous pride, the golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunk. The empire seemed eternal, its power absolute, but empires, like men, are mortal. After the long and brilliant reign of Nebuchadnezzar, a series of weaker kings followed. The last of these was a strange and unpopular ruler named Nabonidus. He was an antiquarian and a religious reformer who neglected Babylon's powerful and traditional chief god, Marduk, in favor of his personal devotion to the moon god, Sin. He spent years away from the capital on a self-imposed exile in Arabia, leaving his son Belshazzar as regent. His actions alienated the powerful and wealthy priestly class of Marduk, creating deep political and religious fractures within the heart of the empire. Babylon, for all its outward strength, was rotting from within. And on the eastern horizon, a new power was rising with astonishing speed. Its leader was a man whose name would echo through eternity: Cyrus, king of Persia. Cyrus was not, at first, a major player. He inherited the throne of Anshan, a small vassal kingdom in what is now southwestern Iran, subject to the authority of the Median Empire. But Cyrus was a man of boundless ambition and military genius. Around 550 BCE, he successfully rebelled against his own grandfather, the Median king Astyages, and in a remarkably deft political move, he united the two principal Iranian peoples, the Medes and the Persians, under his single rule. With this new, formidable power base, he began a series of lightning conquests that redrew the map of the world. He swept west into Anatolia and defeated the fabulously wealthy King Croesus of Lydia, absorbing his kingdom. He pushed east, securing his borders and expanding his domain deep into Central Asia. In little more than a decade, he had forged the largest empire the world had ever seen, and now he turned his attention to the greatest prize of all, Babylon. What made Cyrus so different, so historically significant, was not just the speed of his conquests, but his methods of rule. The empires that came before him, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, had ruled primarily through terror. Their policy was to crush local identities, deport entire populations, and obliterate any trace of resistance. Their inscriptions boast of flaying enemies alive and piling up skulls. Cyrus pioneered a radically different approach to empire. He understood that a multicultural, multi-ethnic empire could be held together more effectively by tolerance than by terror. His was a strategy of co-option and cultural respect. As a matter of official state policy, he would publicly honor the gods of the peoples he conquered. He would present himself not as a foreign invader, but as a legitimate successor, a restorer of proper order. Most importantly, he reversed the policy of mass deportation. He recognized that allowing displaced peoples to return to their homelands, rebuild their temples, and worship their own gods engendered loyalty and stability. This was not the act of a sentimental humanitarian. It was the policy of a brilliant and pragmatic statesman. In 539 BCE, the seemingly invincible city of Babylon fell to Cyrus's army. The end came with shocking speed and with very little bloodshed. The popular account, recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus, claims that the Persians diverted the course of the Euphrates River, which flowed through the middle of the city, and marched their army into the capital along the dry riverbed, while the Babylonians were distracted by a great religious festival. The Book of Daniel captures the drama of that night, with the mysterious handwriting on the wall appearing at Belshazzar's feast, foretelling the imminent fall of the kingdom. The internal divisions in the city, especially the disaffection of the Marduk priesthood, likely played a key role. For the Jewish exiles, the impossible had happened. The great oppressor, Babylon, had been overthrown overnight. But what would this new master, this Persian conqueror, mean for them? The answer can be found, in part, on one of the most famous archaeological artifacts ever discovered, the Cyrus cylinder. Unearthed in the ruins of Babylon in 1879, this barrel-shaped clay cylinder, covered in Akkadian cuneiform script, is Cyrus's own official account of his conquest. It is a masterpiece of political propaganda, and it gives us a direct window into his imperial policy. In the text, Cyrus presents himself as the chosen instrument of Marduk, the very god the previous Babylonian king, Nabonidus, had neglected. He claims that Marduk, angry with Nabonidus, scanned all the lands looking for a righteous ruler and found him. He pronounced the name of Cyrus, king of Anshan, declared him to be the ruler of all the world. Cyrus portrays his invasion as a peaceful liberation, welcomed by the people of Babylon. He describes himself restoring order, returning cult statues to their proper shrines, and respecting the local traditions. Then comes the passage that provides the stunning, extra-biblical confirmation of the policy that would change Jewish history forever. Cyrus declares, "I return to these sacred cities on the other side of the Tigris, the sanctuaries of which have been in ruins for a long time, the images which used to live therein, and established for them permanent sanctuaries. I also gathered all their former inhabitants and returned to them their habitations." The cylinder does not mention the Jews by name. It is a general policy statement concerning multiple displaced peoples within the former Babylonian Empire. But it is an exact description of the policy that the Bible says he extended to the Jews. This foreigner, for his own political and strategic reasons, had decided to reverse the 70-year-old policy of deportation and allow captive peoples to go home. For the Jewish exiles, this was a political miracle. But for the prophets who had been wrestling with the meaning of the exile, it was something far more profound. It was the direct intervention of God, an act of redemption on a cosmic scale. And the prophet who gave this event its most radical theological interpretation is the anonymous voice we hear in chapters 40-55 of the book of Isaiah, a section often called Second Isaiah, written in the final years of the exile. This prophet, watching the rise of Cyrus from afar, saw not just a shift in geopolitical power, but the hand of Yahweh, the God of Israel, orchestrating global events for the sake of his people. And in a series of breathtaking oracles, he names Cyrus and defines his role in a way that shattered all previous theological categories. In chapter 44, the prophet delivers an oracle from God that is astonishing in its specificity, likely written while Cyrus was still consolidating his power, but before he had conquered Babylon. God speaks of the future, who says of Cyrus, "He is my shepherd who will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, 'Let it be rebuilt,' and of the temple, 'Let its foundations be laid.'" The title shepherd was a common honorific for kings in the ancient Near East, a metaphor for their duty to care for their people. But here, it is Yahweh who bestows this title upon a Persian king. Cyrus, the foreigner, will be God's agent to care for his flock, the exiled people of Israel. The prophet predicts with pinpoint accuracy the precise nature of Cyrus's future edict, the rebuilding of both the city and the temple. But it is in the very next verse, the opening of chapter 45, that the prophet deploys a term so shocking, so theologically audacious, that it must have stunned its original audience. This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him and to strip kings of their armor. The Hebrew word for anointed one is Mashiach, Messiah. For the first and only time in the entire Hebrew Bible, this sacred title, the title reserved for the consecrated kings of Israel from the line of David, the title that encapsulated all the hopes for a future, ideal Redeemer, is applied to a Gentile. a foreigner, a pagan who did not worship Yahweh. Cyrus the Great is called God's Messiah. This is a theological revolution in a single word. The prophet is radically redefining how God works in the world. The anointing of Cyrus is not with literal oil, but with power and success. Yahweh declares that he is the one who has grasped Cyrus's right hand, who goes before him to open doors and break down gates of bronze. The meteoric rise of Cyrus, his string of impossible military victories, his conquest of Babylon, these were not, the prophet insists, the result of Persian might or Cyrus's own strategic genius. They were the direct and deliberate work of the God of Israel, who was using this pagan emperor as his chosen instrument. And why? The text is explicit. God tells Cyrus he is doing this so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. But then comes the crucial clarification. For the sake of Jacob my servant, of Israel my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not know me. Cyrus is an unwitting instrument. He is not a convert. He is not a worshiper of Yahweh. He is a tool, a divinely guided pawn in a cosmic game, whose rules he doesn't understand. His own motivations, imperial ambition, political pragmatism are irrelevant. God is using Cyrus's own self-interest to achieve his own redemptive purposes for his own people. The theological implications of this are immense. This prophecy is a declaration of radical, universal monotheism. Yahweh is not one God among many, fighting for supremacy against Marduk or Bel. He is the one and only God, the sovereign Lord of all history, the one who declares, I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God. The rise and fall of empires, the movements of armies, the decrees of kings, all are subordinate to his will. The exile, which had seemed to be the ultimate proof of Yahweh's weakness, is now reinterpreted as a demonstration of his supreme power. He had used Babylon as his instrument of judgment to punish his unfaithful people. Now, he was using Persia as his instrument of redemption to restore them. The entire world stage has become the theater for God's drama of salvation for Israel. The foreigner, the pagan king, has been given one of the most exalted roles in that drama. This stunning prophecy finds its historical fulfillment recorded in the opening verses of the book of Ezra. Writing after the events, the historian begins his account. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm, and also to put it in writing. The text explicitly frames Cyrus's action as a divinely initiated event. The edict that follows mirrors the language of the Cyrus cylinder, but it is cast in a distinctly Jewish theological framework. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. While Cyrus himself would have likely credited Marduk or his own Persian god Ahura Mazda, the biblical writer interprets his decree through a Yahwistic lens. From the perspective of faith, it was the God of Israel who was the true author of this policy. The decree is astonishingly generous. It doesn't just permit the Jews to return, it encourages them. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. Furthermore, Cyrus commands the non-exiled peoples of his empire to support the returnees with silver and gold, goods and livestock, and freewill offerings for the temple. In an act of profound symbolic power, Cyrus also orders the return of the sacred treasures that Nebuchadnezzar had plundered from Solomon's temple 70 years earlier, thousands of gold and silver articles. He is not just permitting a new beginning, he is actively restoring a part of their sacred past. And so, the return begins. The book of Ezra records that a wave of nearly 50,000 exiles, led by figures named Sheshbazzar and Zerubbabel, who was a descendant of the Davidic line, made the arduous, months-long journey from the heart of Mesopotamia back to their devastated homeland, which was now a minor province within the vast Persian empire called Yehud. The book of Ezra describes the scene when the foundations of the new, much smaller, Second Temple were finally laid. It was a moment of profound emotional conflict. The younger generation, who had never seen the original temple, shouted for joy. But the older priests and Levites, who remembered the glory and scale of Solomon's temple, wept aloud, so that the sound of joy was indistinguishable from the sound of weeping. It was a new beginning, but it was also a stark reminder of all that had been lost. This new beginning, this entire Second Temple period of Judaism, would have been impossible without the actions of this foreign king. The period inaugurated by Cyrus's decree would last for nearly 600 years, until the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE. It was during this formative era that the Hebrew scriptures were gathered and canonized into the form we have them today. It was during this period that the synagogue arose as a center for prayer and study. The religious and intellectual developments of the Second Temple period laid the groundwork for the emergence of both rabbinic Judaism and Christianity. The entire future of the Jewish faith, and by extension, the Christian and Islamic faiths that grew from it, was dependent on the political decree of a Persian emperor. Cyrus the Great stands as a unique figure among the foreigners who changed the course of biblical history. He is not an individual convert like Rahab or Ruth, who integrated themselves into the people of Israel through personal faith. He is an outsider who remains an outsider, a global superpower operating on a geopolitical stage, who is nevertheless co-opted by God to serve as Israel's liberator. His legacy is the establishment of a profound theological principle. God's sovereignty is absolute and is not constrained by human allegiances or religious affiliations. He can and will use any person, any nation, any empire to achieve his purposes. The application of the title Mashiach to Cyrus forever expanded the meaning of the term. It demonstrated that God's anointed could be an agent of deliverance from outside the covenant community, a concept that would have profound implications for later Christian claims about a Messiah who came to save not just the Jews, but the Gentiles as well. Cyrus, the pagan Messiah, the unwitting shepherd, became the ultimate paradigm of God's ability to work in surprising and unexpected ways. He is the foreigner who, without knowing the name of Yahweh, was summoned by name to rescue Yahweh's people from the brink of extinction, and in doing so, to make the next chapter of salvation history possible. We step away from the grand imperial decrees of Cyrus the Great, from the dust and labor of the return from exile, and we journey forward another 500 years, landing in a world utterly transformed. The Persian Empire has fallen to Alexander the Great. Alexander's Greek Empire has itself fragmented and been conquered. A brief, fiery moment of Jewish independence under the Maccabees has come and gone. Now, a new, unshakable power dominates the known world. Rome, the land of Judah, now the Roman province of Judea, is once again an occupied territory. The Second Temple, the very building whose construction Cyrus made possible, still stands in Jerusalem. In fact, it has been transformed into one of the most magnificent structures of the ancient world, lavishly rebuilt and expanded by the current ruler, a man of breathtaking ambition and terrifying cruelty, Herod the Great. And in the shadow of this opulent temple, under the watchful gaze of Roman legionaries, the old prophetic hopes burn hotter than ever. The people of Israel, chafing under foreign rule, long for a Messiah, a true Mashiach from the line of David, who will come to liberate them. They are looking for a political savior, a warrior king. And it is into this tense, volatile world, simmering with messianic expectation, that our final group of surprising foreigners arrives. And they are, perhaps, the most mysterious of all. Our story, as told in the Gospel of Matthew, begins not in a stable with shepherds, but in the corridors of power in Jerusalem. The text says simply, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. With this one sentence, a group of unknown men from an unknown land hijacks the narrative. Their arrival is an intrusion, a strange and unexpected event that immediately throws the capital city into chaos. Before we follow their story, we must first clear away the centuries of tradition and nativity scene imagery that have domesticated these radical figures. We think we know them. 3 kings named Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, dressed in regal splendor, riding camels in a neat line. The reality presented in the text is far more ambiguous and potent. First, who were they? The Greek word Matthew uses is maga. This is not a word for king. It is a term with a long and complex history. Originally, the maga were a priestly caste from the ancient nation of Media, which later became part of the Persian Empire. They were keepers of sacred lore, experts in astronomy, and priests of the Zoroastrian religion. The famous Greek historian Herodotus described them as a powerful tribe with the ability to interpret dreams and omens. over time as the Persian Empire gave way to the Greek, and then the Roman. The term magi broadened and, in some contexts, became debased. It could refer to charlatans, sorcerers, and magicians like Simon Magus in the Book of Acts. But it also retained its older, more respectable sense of a learned class of philosopher-scientists from the East who specialized in studying the stars. These were the astronomers and astrologers of their day, men who believed that the movements of the heavens held the key to understanding divine will and the destiny of humanity on earth. They were Gentiles, pagans from outside the covenant of Israel, and they were practitioners of a discipline, astrology, that was explicitly condemned in the Hebrew scriptures. How many were there? The Bible gives no number. The tradition of 3 arose simply because they brought 3 distinct gifts. Early Christian art and tradition varies, sometimes depicting 2, sometimes 4, and in some Syrian traditions, as many as 12. The image of 3 is a later symbolic convention. Where did they come from? The text is tantalizingly vague. From the East. This could mean a number of places. The most likely candidate is Persia, the historical heartland of the Magi and Zoroastrianism, a religion which itself had a belief in a future savior figure. Another strong possibility is Babylon. Not only did Babylon have a world-renowned, millennium-old tradition of astronomical observation and astrological interpretation, but it had also been the home of a large Jewish diaspora since the exile. It is plausible that these Babylonian magi, through centuries of interaction with the Jewish community, had become familiar with the Hebrew prophecies of a coming king, specifically the prophecy of another foreign mystic, Balaam, who declared in the book of Numbers, "A star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel." These men were not kings, but they were almost certainly kingmakers, royal counselors whose job it was to identify auspicious moments and legitimize rulers through their celestial knowledge. They arrive in Jerusalem, the Jewish capital, and they ask a question. And it is a question of such political dynamite that it sends a shockwave through the entire city. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? Imagine the audacity of this. They walk into a capital city ruled by a notoriously jealous king, a man who has killed his own sons to protect his throne, and they ask for the location of a newborn rival king. They are not asking if a king has been born. They are stating it as a fact. Their science, their reading of the heavens, has assured them of this. They are simply asking for a geographical location, and they give the reason for their long journey. We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. This star, it is the catalyst for everything. For the Magi, the sky was a sacred text, and a new star was a divine announcement. What was this star? For 2,000 years, astronomers, historians, and theologians have debated this question. Some have sought a natural explanation. Could it have been a supernova, the explosion of a dying star? It's possible. Chinese astronomers, who kept meticulous records, noted a broom star around 5 BCE, but the descriptions are vague. Could it have been a comet? Perhaps, but comets were typically interpreted in the ancient world as omens of disaster, not the birth of a benevolent king. The most popular naturalistic explanation is a series of planetary conjunctions. The German astronomer Johannes Kepler was the first to calculate that in the year 7 BCE, a rare triple conjunction of the planets Jupiter and Saturn occurred in the constellation of Pisces. The astrological significance of this would have been immense to ancient Magi. Jupiter was widely considered the royal planet, the star of kingship. Saturn was sometimes associated with the Jewish people, and the constellation Pisces, the fish, was associated by some ancient astrologers with the end of an old age and the beginning of a new one. For a group of Babylonian or Persian astrologers, a series of conjunctions of the king planet with the Jewish planet in the sign of the new age could absolutely have been interpreted as a sign that the long-awaited king of the Jews had been born. But the way Matthew describes the star suggests something more. A normal star or planet does not rise, disappear, and then reappear. It does not go ahead of them, and it certainly does not come to a stop and hover over a specific house. The text seems to be describing a miraculous, supernatural phenomenon. It behaves less like a celestial body and more like a personal guide. It is a light that functions much like the pillar of cloud and fire that guided the Israelites through the wilderness in the Exodus. Whether a natural event imbued with divine meaning or a pure miracle, for the Magi, this star was an unambiguous summons from heaven. It was a call to a quest. The reaction to the Magi's question in Jerusalem reveals a profound and damning spiritual diagnosis of the holy city. The narrative sets up a powerful three-way contrast. First, there is King Herod. The text says, "When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him." Herod was not a legitimate Davidic king. He was an Idumean, a descendant of Esau, placed on the throne by Roman power. He was a brilliant builder, but a monstrous tyrant, a man whose paranoia was legendary. The historian Josephus records his bloody reign, his constant fear of conspiracies, his execution of his beloved wife Mariamne, 3 of his own sons, and countless other perceived rivals. For this aging, insecure, and murderous king, the news that a group of prestigious Eastern kingmakers had arrived in his capital, looking for a newborn, legitimate king of the Jews, was not just disturbing. It was an existential threat. His response is immediate and predictable: fear, deception, and a secret plot to eliminate the rival. He represents the worldly power that sees the true king as a threat to be destroyed. Second, there are the chief priests and teachers of the law. Herod, in his panic, summons his own religious experts. He doesn't know the answer, but they do. He asks them the Magi's question: where, according to the prophecies, is the Messiah to be born? Without hesitation, they give him the correct answer. They quote the prophet Micah: "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." They have the data. They possess the sacred texts, the revealed knowledge. They can pinpoint the exact location on a map. And what do they do with this world-changing information? Absolutely nothing. They don't form a welcoming party. They don't set out on the 5-mile journey to Bethlehem to see if their own prophecies have come true. Their knowledge is purely academic, inert, and spiritually dead. They represent a religious establishment that holds the truth in its hands, but is utterly unmoved by it. And third, there are the Magi themselves, the pagan astrologers, the foreigners. They have only a single, ambiguous sign in the sky. They don't have the scrolls of the prophets, and yet they are the ones who act. They are the ones who undertake a long, costly, and dangerous journey of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of miles. They are the ones who risk the wrath of a tyrant by asking their dangerous question. And they are the ones whose sole motivation is to find this newborn king and worship him. This is the great Matthean irony. The Gentiles are acting like faithful Jews, while the king of the Jews and the religious leaders of the Jews are acting like faithless pagans. The outsiders are the true insiders. The seekers from afar are the true worshippers. Herod, armed with the information from his scribes, now puts his own devious plan into motion. He summons the Magi for a secret meeting. He interrogates them about the exact time the star had appeared, so he can calculate the child's age for his future murderous purpose. Then he sends them on their way to Bethlehem, cloaking his malice in a veneer of piety. Go and search carefully for the child, he tells them. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. It is a chilling lie from a man who only worships his own power. The Magi leave the dark, scheming atmosphere of Jerusalem and head south towards Bethlehem. And as they do, their celestial guide reappears. The star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. The original Greek here is emphatic. They rejoiced with an exceedingly great joy. Their long, difficult quest, guided by faith in a heavenly sign, is about to be rewarded. The star leads them not to a palace, but to a simple house. The narrative has moved on from the birth in the stable. Joseph has likely found modest lodging for his family, and there they saw the child with his mother Mary. What follows is the climax of their pilgrimage, and one of the most significant moments in the infancy narrative. The text says, "They bowed down and worshipped him." The Greek word is proskenses, a word that describes the act of prostrating oneself on the ground in homage. It is the posture of a subject before a great king, or of a human before a god. These learned, wealthy, and powerful men from the East completely humble themselves before a toddler in a poor village in a backwater province of the Roman Empire. They are the very first people in Matthew's Gospel to recognize the child's true identity and to offer him worship. The shepherds in Luke's Gospel came to see a marvel. The Magi in Matthew's Gospel come to worship a king. Then they open their treasures. These are not simple baby gifts. They are a coronation ceremony in a box, a theological statement made through precious materials. They presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The symbolism, recognized by Christian interpreters since the earliest centuries, is profound and multi-layered. Gold is the tribute for a king. It is the metal of royalty, the currency of empires. With this gift, the Magi acknowledge the child's sovereign authority. He is the king of the Jews they were seeking. Frankincense is the tribute for God. It is a fragrant, costly tree resin that was used in the ancient world as a key component of incense, which was burned in temples as an offering to a deity. In the Jewish temple, a special blend of incense was burned daily on the altar before the Holy of Holies. This gift acknowledges the child's divinity. He is not just a human king, he is God made manifest. And myrrh is the tribute for one who is to die. Myrrh was another valuable aromatic resin used as a perfume and a medicine. But it had one other prominent use. It was a key ingredient in the oils used to anoint a body for burial. This gift is a shocking and somber foreshadowing of the child's ultimate fate. It acknowledges his humanity, his suffering, and his sacrificial death. In 3 gifts, the Magi proclaim the entire mystery of the Incarnation. Jesus is King, God, and the man who will die. Their mission is now complete. They have found the King, they have worshipped him, and they have offered their prophetic gifts. And now, divine intervention protects them and the child from Herod's plot. Having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Just as a star guided their coming, a dream guides their departure. They are men who are attuned to the supernatural, who listen to the voice of God in the night. They obey without question, disappearing from the narrative as mysteriously as they arrived, their part in the sacred drama fulfilled. Their secret departure enrages Herod. Realizing he has been tricked, the paranoid king unleashes a storm of violence. Based on the timeline he had extracted from the Magi, he orders the slaughter of every male child 2 years old and under in Bethlehem and the surrounding area. It is an act of unspeakable horror, a testament to the depths of worldly power's opposition to the kingdom of God. This slaughter of the innocents casts Herod as a new pharaoh, who in the book of Exodus ordered the death of the Hebrew male infants in an attempt to destroy their future deliverer, Moses. And just as Moses was saved, so is Jesus. Joseph, warned in yet another dream, flees with his family to another foreign country, Egypt, which ironically becomes a place of refuge from the King of the Jews. So what is the enduring legacy of these strange foreigners? Why does Matthew place this remarkable story at the very threshold of his gospel? Because the Magi and their quest establish the central theme of his entire work, the universal scope of Jesus' kingship. From the very beginning, Matthew wants his readers, who were likely predominantly Jewish Christians, to understand that this Messiah, this son of David and son of Abraham, has not come just for the physical descendants of Abraham. His light is a light for all nations. The Magi are the first fruits of the Gentiles, the symbolic beginning of the great pilgrimage of the peoples of the world to the light of Christ. Their journey foreshadows the final command Jesus will give at the end of the gospel. disciples of all nations. The story of the Magi is the Great Commission in miniature, enacted at the Messiah's birth. Their journey is a fulfillment of the grandest Old Testament prophecies about the eschatological age, when the nations would stream to Jerusalem to honor Israel's God and King. The prophet Isaiah had foretold a day when nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn, a day when caravans of camels would arrive from the east, bringing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. The Magi are the living embodiment of that prophecy. They are the first wave of the nations coming to the light. Finally, the Magi are presented as a paradigm of true wisdom and authentic faith. In a world of corrupt power and dead religion, they are the true seekers. Their wisdom is not the static, academic knowledge of the scribes, but a dynamic, searching wisdom that leads them on a pilgrimage. Their faith is not a passive belief, but an active, costly quest. They show us what it means to respond to the revelation of God. You see the sign, you take the risk, you follow the light, you ask the questions, you persevere past the obstacles, you humble yourself in worship, and you offer the best of what you have. These stargazers from the east are the final surprising foreigners in our journey. They do not intermarry into the line of David like Rahab and Ruth. They do not issue a political decree that rebuilds the nation like Cyrus. Their impact is at once more subtle and more profound. They arrive at the moment of incarnation, the pivot point of all history, and by their presence, their quest, and their worship, they define the identity of the newborn child. They declare him to be a universal king, a divine being, and a suffering man, and they demonstrate that the proper response to his arrival is a seeking heart and a bended knee. They are the ultimate outsiders who reveal the ultimate truth, that the Son of God came into the world not for one people, but for all people, and that even those who are furthest away can see his light and find their way home.